I'm delighted to be here today in a different location. I'm currently in Mayor Brown's Paris office with Liz Stern. Liz, you are head of the firm's global mobility practice, and you're also managing partner of our Washington, D.C. office. So welcome and great to be here together today.
Thank you, Amy. I am delighted to be here as well in beautiful Paris to talk about such an important topic.
Brilliant. Well, let's get started. So the first question I have for you is, how have the recent events sort of focused everyone's attention on issues of mobility?
Well, I think with a crisis like what's happened in Ukraine that erupted out of nowhere, one of the first issues that arises is the movement of people. And what we found right away is our clients' security programs really required them to address how to help families that were in Ukraine, how to evacuate them, how to assist them, how to address them moving safely. And of course, they personally dealt with these issues. So essentially from inception, the movement of people to evacuate out of Ukraine became an issue. As the crisis has continued, our clients are also assisting with refugee programs for folks who are not their employees or even relatives of their employees, but they're simply joining in the Global Solidarity Program to assist Ukrainians. And then I would say shortly after the crisis began, companies started to view what they would do about their operations in Russia. And I know, because I've had a look at your questions, that you will ask me about that. And that's created a different aspect of mobility. And I think that we're keeping ourselves busy addressing immediate term, near term, and long-term options for these individuals who are changing their lives completely by moving across borders, many borders, not just one border.
Absolutely. And so what are the main issues that you are seeing on the ground clients are actually grappling with?
I think the first issue has been, can individuals who have fled Ukraine specifically, even obtain a visa interview or the equivalent thereof at a consulate that will welcome them in order for them to relocate to the country where they hope to meet other relatives or friends and stay stable for probably what is a 1 to 2 year period. I mean, we don't really know how long it is, but we're not talking about 30 days. We're talking about something that's really quite extended. And so navigating how different governments address providing consular services has been a big part of our advice. Fortunately, we have the Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs of the United States, who we attracted to the firm, Carl Risch, and one of our real leaders in our immigration system that are assisting with this, along with our immigration experts in the UK, here in France, and in other locations to help navigate that. But really, initially, it's almost getting a vehicle for registration, visa, travel authorization that allows individuals to move. And in giving that advice, we also have to be careful that the individuals who are helping and sponsoring those fleeing Ukrainians are not breaking any laws themselves. They have to be careful of it because, for example, the Ukrainian military service requirement for Ukrainian males 18 to 60 is something that many want to observe. They have to stay in Ukraine. It's really quite a complex maze of regulation.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And we've seen governments all around the world sort of rushing to help Ukrainians exit. So how has this been achieved?
Well, it's really pretty unprecedented. The world has come together. The EU has come up with an entire temporary protection regime so that it isn't just Poland that is overpowered. Of the 6.5 million Ukrainians at the last count that have fled, 3.5 million of them landed in Poland. So you have to understand that's a huge proportion of the population in Poland. The EU accordingly passed a regime that allows temporary protection for Ukrainians throughout the 27 member states. That's pretty unprecedented and amazing in speed as well as scope. The United States, who initially paused to see what we could do, the Biden administration has now passed the broadest program we've ever seen in history, Uniting for Ukraine, by which anyone in America who is legally in America, not just Americans, but anyone who is legally in America, can sponsor Ukrainians to come to the United States, provided that they will act as a financial sponsor in case of any problem. In reality, we expect no problems because there is great talent coming out of Ukraine. It's actually very helpful because we have such a low unemployment rate and such a need for talent that we're welcoming easily. But to give you a sense of the breadth, even in Asia, if you look at Japan and Korea as just examples, they've passed regulation to allow Ukrainians to come to their countries. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it, really?
Really impressive.
Yeah, really impressive. And we've also seen businesses obviously committing to wind down their operations, whether that's in Russia or Belarus. What sort of impact and effect are we expecting that to have?
Well, that's one of the most complex aspects of the advice that we're giving right now. As they address that, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of those employees will leave Russia or Belarus. Many of them will stay. And so actually providing options for what they will do, how they will remain occupied, what benefits might continue after the operations close is a very thorny issue. And it's particularly thorny because, of course, Russia is passing certain regulation to penalize companies that shut down. So there's quite a lot of risk around that. But companies are having to navigate that and quite quickly and broadly with a very high headcount. There are Russians and there are international personnel that are leaving Russia, and you then have to have them find a place to go. And sometimes if they're not quite sure if they're leaving, you want a default plan. Will you, for example, have certain Russians fly out to, I don't know, Dubai, and then ultimately relocate somewhere else that might be a more long-term place, has been part of the puzzle. And finally, fascinating issue, the individuals who are facilitating the shutdown, such as the chief of HR in these various facilities, are in personal danger. So addressing the security of those individuals and their own risk of criminal liability becomes a very complex issue. Do employers wish to help or not help with that is in itself a judgment call.
And from a mobility perspective, when we're looking at our clients, what should they be thinking about to make sure they manage this sort of smooth transition out of, smooth exit, I suppose, out of Russia?
I think the first and dominant issue is to have up-to-date, truly real-time information that is reliable about what the competing regulatory and practical issues are. There's so much misinformation in a crisis with all the best of intentions sometimes, but then actually knowing where they can go, how quickly they can move, whether the risk is in the red zone or perhaps more in the amber zone, that alone is just absolutely essential. So what we are advising clients is that as part of their crisis response plan, they need a mobility knowledge center that helps them to stay up to date on what happens with mobility issues for their people so they don't misstep. And often that goes hand in hand with legal, the security folks, as well as, of course, HR and employee relations leaders in the company. Having the information that is absolutely accurate is very critical.
And I think that probably is partially the answer to what I was going to ask next, but there may be more to it, which is around the sort of visa and entry requirements, which are constantly changing and evolving, I understand. So how do clients make sure that they stay totally up to date with the requirements?
So many clients have asked us to do a couple of things. One is to host virtual town halls to educate their key decision makers, so the C-level and often the managers that manage these different functions, including HR, legal, security, and some other issues, to be up to date on what they should be looking for. Then they ask us to provide them a knowledge center. Where can they go that's kind of a one-stop? We ourselves at Mayer Brown have, of course, created our Ukraine crisis response portal that is a gateway to information. But then how do you cross-check it in the moment? And then we've created a hotline for them to be able to reach us and some of our experts and some of the government experts of key government or sometimes multilateral groups that really will know how to do this. I might add that many of our clients are also working with certain kind of rescue organizations in order to keep up to date. And so making sure that we connect the client and the rescue organization and ourselves with that knowledge base becomes very much part of our guidance to them.
And Liz, looking slightly more medium to long term, this mass exodus obviously is going to have a huge impact, sort of the labour market and for businesses moving forward. So when, which hopefully will be soon, people can start to look at rebuilding. How's that going to work? What are the challenges going to be for businesses?
Yes, I actually think it will be quite challenging with regard to how businesses recover from having shut down in Russia and Belarus, what they do. But I think we've seen during COVID how adaptable business can be, how agile, more agile than I think even the business owners themselves expected it to be. I think we've seen that at Mayer Brown itself. But on the other hand, as with every challenge, there's a flip side, which is the opportunity. And the opportunity is the following. There is a significant shortage in the United States, in the United Kingdom, your home base, and in much of the Western world of really high-level STEM talent. And ironically, both Ukraine and Russia, Belarus, I mean really Eastern Europe, is a hub for amazing STEM talent. There's an opportunity to capitalize on that and create some rebuild and maybe more globally versatile talent. I say globally versatile because I don't think all of these people will stay in the new location. I think they'll ultimately want to go back.
They're going to want to go home.
But the employment of the individual and the capturing of that talent for the business, an international business, could remain even as they fluidly return back to Ukraine, to Belarus, or to Russia.
And there's been a lot of support, from everybody, I think, on focusing on supporting individuals who are fleeing this really awful situation. Can you give any examples of how you've seen employers specifically helping with fleeing Ukrainians?
Employers also have been massive contributors to Red Cross, International Rescue, UN High Commission on Refugees, various groups that are facilitating new options. And they've done that both through their commitment of their time, commitment of contributions, and fundraising efforts. But we've also seen things, just as we've seen here at Mayer Brown. It's so fascinating to me that our German office has actually housed Ukrainians personally in their homes in order to give them a temporary place to stay until they can work out what their longer-term visa program is. And we in DC, since I'm the managing partner of the DC office, and learned about what we've done in Germany, we said to our DC folks, if you want to sponsor, we will also support you and we'll match your sponsorship. So you see that kind of thing by many, many of our clients. We as a firm doing that throughout our offices. I think there are just so many ways to help, and we all feel the passion, don't we, Amy? We just do.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Quite a few of our clients and also some of our London partners also have Ukrainians currently in their homes, which is fantastic.
Yes.
So how is this mobility then issue going to affect Ukraine's ability to sort of rebuild and recover moving forward?
Well, I think that's very difficult to predict, but the impression that we have, having heard the marvelous Zelensky speak so many times, that even though he speaks in his native language, you can feel what he's saying as you're viewing what he says. It really does feel that there will be a return, and it really seems that way. They're going to bring people back as the war is hopefully surmounted, and they're able to then begin rebuilding. And I think also because for most families, you do have the males 18 to 60 who are still in Ukraine. There's no question that they want to go back. They're looking for that reunification. So it'll really be a question, I think, of how much of a toll it takes on Ukraine in the interim period because of the length of time that it might take to shut down this war.
And just to finish off today, Liz, from your perspective, what would you say the key takeaways are for any of our clients who are watching this today?
I think it's very important to use this as an opportunity for additional preparedness of the global mobility of employees in crisis in the same way that global security issues are handled. And evacuation has always been part of those security programs, but when you see things happen on this massive of a scale, I think it really is going to affect a change in the standard operating protocol for companies to build in reliable knowledge, appropriate training, what is the crisis response team that will know about mobility, who will work with them in order to be able to mobilize solutions that are holistic and really global. Because as I mentioned in looking at this crisis, and I think this would be true with any sort of issue like this, and we've seen it in the past, it's never about going from Ukraine to one country. It's about an entirely internationally fluid movement. And as I said, one that might involve going out to an initial country, that is your landing location, ultimately relocating somewhere for an extended period, possibly relocating to a second location for a longer period, and ultimately considering return. That's really quite a lot of global mobility for each individual that is involved in the departure.